A couple other things that I want to bring up. Mr. Tyler, in your testimony, you also talked about what the administration is trying to do, and that the final and most important data standardization goal lacks specificity. And this is for any of you. Have any of you taken a look at what the administration is trying to do and offered any recommendations for to close that gap or to get the specificity that we need? And I'll start with you, Mr. Tyler.
Sure, and this is very straightforward. It may sound like common sense, but because that plan, and this is the only public plan that we have access to, simply had to be determined in many, many locations, especially in the out years, we really have no understanding at all. So very straightforward, I think it would be a good question for the administration. When will we have more specificity? When will we have milestones?
Does the GRADE Act help provide some of that?
I think one of the key things of the GRADE Act, and I say this in respect for the legislation, probably the administration and the agencies can have the full authority to do that if they wanted to. What I think the GRADE Act does, like a lot of legislation, including the GONE Act, is put the stamp of importance from Congress to say, let's get this done, as well as making sure that there's timelines and reporting back to Congress on a regular basis. That is key.
Ms. Keegan, you were talking about the divisions between the federal grant departments and the databases contribute to issues for reporting and compliance. And I just had this thought, and you can respond to it. But when you mentioned grant management, and I wrote a note, define grant management, because what I'm thinking, our grant management workforce, I think is what you said, is if you're talking about grant management workforce, it seems to me, and again, I ran a think tank for 24 years. Prior to that, I worked for 2 engineering companies. It seems to me that those who approve the grants, who do the evaluations and approve them, should also be the ones who evaluate them. And we're talking about a single portal, eliminating the various silos. I'd like for you to give me an explanation of what you meant by a grant management workforce.
So one of the challenges with having siloed grant management functions is that each function has different training needs. So if you're dealing with financial information and financial dispersing grant awards, you're going to train the CFO program people differently than you would if you're dealing with grant program experts who are running, say, a FEMA hazard mitigation grant program, who need much more training on specific regulations for those programs. You mentioned the question about whether or not the folks that approve the grants would also be the folks that would evaluate the grants. The short answer is it depends on what you mean by evaluate. The program workforce, the grant program specialists, are the ones that run the review panels to review applications and to make awards. Those people are also the ones that manage the grants. So theoretically, it would be the same workforce that would approve a grant that would then evaluate whether or not the grantee had met any kind of performance matrix that was required, or whether the grantee was in compliance with the regulations for the grant program. Now, you might have the other shops, like the financial shop, review things like, was the audit completed correctly? Was the audit submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, et cetera? And the IG might get involved if there was some allegation of waste, fraud, and abuse by the grantee. But the grant program people do definitely have a key role in approving and then also evaluating that. So if you were to look at developing training requirements, you could theoretically break it up, where here's the training requirements for financial grant management, here's training requirements for program grant management.
Here's the thing. We have the federal acquisition regulations for procuring goods and services. And, you know, we'll put out specifications for what we need to buy, and then supposedly we buy what we specify. And maybe this is a little simplistic, but I would think that we should be doing something similar to that on grants, that if someone submits a grant request and they define the objective and the timeline, then there ought to be a way, and I tend to think it should be the same people that then follow up on that to make sure that the objective was achieved and within the time frame. I would literally go so far on some of the really big grants that we sent out the money, similar to what you would do on a engineering contract. If we had a $500 million facility we were going to build, we would get so much on the design phase, so much, breaking ground and the construction phase and 50% complete, 75% complete, and then after final inspection, you get the balance of the pavement. What I've found is we don't do that a lot. And consequently, we've created a huge problem on the spending side. And I guess the thing, and again, going back with my meetings with GAO and the General Dodaro, is that every dollar that we spend right now on this stuff that goes out improperly or is mismanaged is a dollar we have to borrow. We're projecting deficits next year of $1 trillion. So every grant dollar, if it's $700 billion, every grant dollar is a borrowed dollar that we're paying interest on. So I think we owe it to the taxpayers, we owe it to the American public, and we owe it to our own future to make sure that we maximize whatever spending that we approve, and we get what we're paying for, and that we eliminate as much as possible as we're trying to do on the improper payments so that we can get better control of this. I think I'm going to conclude with that. I don't want to weary the witnesses. You've given excellent testimony. I appreciate you being here. It's insightful and helpful. So unless the hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit a written opening statement or questions for the record. If there's no further business without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.